Hello, and welcome to our latest webinar on cloud data backup.
Thank you, Kevin. My name is Anthony Rivera. I'm the Chief Information Officer here at Access Point. Have over 23 years of experience on both the IT and security industries, serving all different verticals in my career and building out robust IT systems as well as security programs for those applications.
My name is Kevin Hartwig. I'm the Director of Infrastructure Services here at Access Point Consulting. My background's a little varied. I started out more on the software engineering front, and then as I started to work more with cloud technologies, I got an interest in there and became more of a DevOps site reliability engineer. The last 10 years of my career has been kind of helping different companies at various stages of their cloud journey, trying to build performant and reliable solutions. Today, we're going to do a brief overview of cloud data backup and give you some best practice considerations around that and work our way towards an example of how we thought about backing up some of our data with one of the tools we use here at Access Point Consulting.
So starting us off, Kevin, we have data classification, which I think is a really great starting point for organizations when they're thinking about their backup strategy or even their disaster recovery strategy, right? It's critically important that you know where your data is. Is it in a multi-cloud environment, a hybrid cloud environment? Do you have critical data on endpoints that you need to cover? So really just quantifying where your data sources are, what of that is the absolute critical data that you need, what are you going to need in a disaster recovery type of event? And then from there, working to prioritize the backup of that and the frequency, right? All data isn't equal, so maybe certain data doesn't get backed up as frequently or needs to be backed up more frequently depending on that. So I think, this is a really good starting point, a really good place for people to start thinking about, as they start this conversation, and then, at scale too, right? And what does that look like as the company grows? We could talk about data retention a little bit, and I know you have some thoughts on that, but that's another key area. How long do I have to keep my backups? It all, at the end of the day, can have an impact on cost, right? So, what are your thoughts, Kevin?
It's pretty hard to create a comprehensive disaster recovery solution if you don't understand what you need to recover in the event of a disaster. Generally, this is kind of the first step for every company in understanding how to build out their disaster recovery solution and their overall backup considerations. One of the things I like to think on is how your data is going to grow over time. When you start out, it may be that you have a few users of your application or service or your company, and you don't have a ton of data. But as your company grows, you need to make sure that you're planning ahead so that the solution you choose can work with your growth. And then let's talk a little bit about some of the access requirements. If your service or application only needs to access your data once a day, that might be a different type of data storage technique than if you need to access it once a year or even just for compliance concerns. So there's a lot of potential cost savings there. If you only access your data once every 5 years or so, then you can put it potentially in like a cold storage, and you can save quite a bit of money on your data retention cost. And I think it's very important to define your data retention policy so that you can set up certain rules potentially on your data and how it's stored. You can set it so that after 30 days or something, when it's most used, you can put it to a lower tier of data storage to save your company money. You can also have it deleted after a certain number of years based off of your company or industry's compliance requirements. And kind of the last point on this slide is to identify key stakeholders of data. All data should have an owner. That person is ultimately responsible for the structure of the data, what goes into the data, its recovery time objective, its recovery point objective, and potentially in the case of a disaster, they're the ones that are going to be able to verify that the data is intact once it is recovered. So that's a very important part. There shouldn't hopefully be one owner of all data in your system.
Mhm.
It should
Yeah,
be most likely the user or the creator of that data who can help you define a lot of this data classification needs.
absolutely. Backup strategy is another key area, Kevin, that I feel strongly about, and I think there's a lot that goes into this. We could probably spend 30 minutes just on this conversation, but you know what's your backup schedule, right? And how does that play into your disaster recovery policy? How does that play into the SLAs as an organization, right? That you may have with your customers. Um, Understanding, going back to the responsibility model, are you responsible for backing up your own data? Does the cloud provider do it? These are all questions that you have to understand prior to, really thinking through your strategy and implementing something. Because, if you're responsible, let's say, for backing up your Microsoft 365 data, and you're backing it up once a day, well, as we take that step further back and we look at what's our recovery point objective, okay, I have a 24-hour recovery point objective because that's how soon my backup is, or do I need to adjust that, to a tighter window to be able to support a business need or something like that. So, I think when we talk about backup schedule, it's not, hey, let's just back up the data once a day. You can get really granular here. It's really driven by your business needs. As well as backup types, right? And whether you need to consider an offsite or a multi-cloud backup solution. Like, as an example, we use Microsoft, but we back up our data to another cloud provider, right? So having that diversity within the provider should something go down. When we're talking also about backup, is the critical data that we're backing up available to us, should there be a disaster, right? So if I'm backing up and my DR plans are in Microsoft and Microsoft goes down, how do I access them, right? So that's where that continuity of having multiple providers comes into play. But interested to hear your thoughts, Kevin.
Yeah, I think you touched on a lot of good topics here. One of the bullet points here is to use offsite or cloud backups to secure your data. I think an important consideration here is that even if you aren't in the cloud, there are solutions that will allow you to back up to the cloud for your local data centers, potentially even recover into the cloud or into your data center after a disaster occurs. So that's something you can consider. I know a lot of offsite backups, at least in the past, have been more of a manual process where you're sending it off somewhere and then the recovery is them bringing the data back. But now there's more automated solutions to that. And to talk about automation, I think making sure you automate all of your backups in general is something that's very important. You don't want a backup to be something that has to be a manual process that somebody could forget, somebody could go on vacation, you name it, and whenever you're ready for that backup, it may not be available. Uh, Set alerting around the automation of backups. Make sure that your backups are finishing in a timely manner. Make sure they're not too large, things like that. One of the bullet points here, I think, that I was looking up the other day is actually immutable backups and when they're necessary. So this is something that I think is very specific to certain businesses where you need to maintain an exact copy of data. Mutable backups are something that most cloud providers have the ability to create, but there are some trade-offs to that. It tends to be more costly data backups. You have to have somebody who kind of understands how to handle immutable backups in the event of maybe a some sort of breach or a virus. Potentially, your backup could be infected. So understanding like what the considerations are for restoring from an immutable backup is very something that you should be thinking about as well. And then Anthony touched on backup types. Understanding whether you need full backups every time or incremental backups. Maybe you have a combination of that. I know a lot of database backups tend to be a full backup once a week with with incremental backups occurring on a more regular basis. This can help you to more quickly recover your data in the case of a disaster because a lot of times you can restore from that incremental backup from where the cloud provider was last at or other considerations.
Yeah, some other strategies too, Kevin, that I would think, again, topics for consideration, and we're kind of scratching the surface here, but, you know, do you need to bake in e-discovery capabilities into your backup, right? To be able to search those in the event of some type of legal hold, things like that. These are all kind of conversation points at this point. And again, we're really just kind of scratching the surface here, but, again, all of these things should be kind of topics of conversation amongst a team.
Yep, agreed. Next up, we're going to talk about how you can best secure your backups. I think this is kind of a best practice around most cloud technologies, not necessarily just backups in general, but we'll talk through a few right now. Encrypting your data at flight and at rest. I think this is something very important. Either if you're backing up locally or backing up to the cloud, make sure that in flight your data is encrypted and at rest it is encrypted at its destination. Make there are considerations around bring your own key versus using a provider managed encryption key. I'm sure Anthony will have some great ideas on that, but you need to implement strict access controls. Make sure that only those who need access to your backups have access to the backup. And a secondary way to secure backups is to use multi-factor authentication to validate that the person who is logging in is the person you're expecting them to be. Your backups are the most sensitive data about your company. It's kind of the keys to the kingdom in a lot of situations. So making sure that you're locking those down as best as possible is something that's very important. And on top of that, just do regular backup integrity checks. Like this is something that, either through a DR testing process or some other testing process, make sure that your backups are what you expect them to be. If you restore and your data isn't what you expect it to be, it's kind of useless at that point. And, again, talk to your experts in the data, make sure they're validating the data looks like what you want and you're backing up what you need. Anthony, I know that as a security expert, you have a lot of thoughts on how to secure
Yeah.
your backups in the cloud and locally, but what are your
Yeah,
thoughts?
so I think there's a lot that we can dive into here. I would say, one of the most important things is, when you're talking about a backup vendor today, there's a lot of different vendors out there. We've kind of evolved from that traditional on-site type of backup to a cloud-based backup. Do your due diligence on the vendors, right? Going back to third-party risk, right? Is the vendor strong? Do they have the proper controls? Are they SOC 2 compliant? Or depending on what industry and regulation you're operating in, do they meet your requirements? Oftentimes with these types of vendors, going back to implement strict access controls, it's an API integration that you're giving them into your tenant or into your platform as a service, or whatever operating model you're in the cloud. So you want to ensure that those service accounts are being protected, that you're rotating the keys if possible, that you're managing those keys well. Again, it goes back to other topics that we've talked about with cloud best practices and cloud security. So just making sure that you're choosing the right vendor, you're doing the right due diligence, you're kind of right sizing it from a security perspective, because you are entrusting, if you're going with that kind of vendor, them with your critical data, as Kevin said. So I think it's, again, scratching the surface here, but all important topics to consider as we talk through the scenario.
Definitely. Uh, this topic's a little bit closer to my heart as a site reliability engineer. You know, General observability is kind of a best practice in all cloud situations, but on data backups especially, it's important to understand what's going on with your systems. Implementing real-time monitoring. This is something that you can use to understand who's accessing your backups, whether somebody who's not allowed to access the backups may be attempting to do that either for malicious or just not knowing what they're supposed to access. Understanding like when your backups are running, how long they're running, what the size of the backups is. This is something that's a consideration, especially as you get into more incremental backups, where if your incremental backup's taking longer than the backup window to complete, then that is not going to be a very effective backup solution. Make it easy to view this kind of data. Use dashboards of whatever tools you're using, build them out into a third-party observability platform, and create reports. This is kind of one that's your company is going to love, is if you can generate a report on all of your backups. That's going to help when you're dealing with compliance audits and other things like that. And then generally monitoring for anomalies. So this is something that I know I've seen at a few of the companies that I've been at, is a change is made to either how data is entering your system, or an application got updated. Potentially somebody turned on debug logging in production, and now you see that your data backups are twice the size they were from the day before. So understanding when that occurs and trying to reduce costs by making sure that you're notified early and often when there's anomalies in your data.
Yeah, and I
You know,
think to add on to that, Kevin, the the telemetry that you're getting, I think people just think, oh, it's backup, but it's really insightful because it's touching your critical data, right? So to your point, if you're seeing these weird, peaks and valleys in your backup consumption, or the job times, or whatever the case may be, it can be really indicative of a problem, right? And you don't want your first test of your backup to be when you need it in a disaster, right? So, going back to what does my restore time look like? How quickly can I bring these back on? It plays back into the DR scenario, which again is kind of a heavily integrated concept into this. So I think monitoring is definitely something, both from a cost, but understanding that telemetry, what's going on in my environment. Especially another area is we talk a lot today about ransomware and affecting the backups. Providers have built-in capabilities to help detect that, but that could be another way of just seeing, is something going on in my backups that I need to be concerned about. That maybe an early warning indicator that's very effective.
yep. Next up, disaster recovery. Backups are important for many reasons, but a lot of companies, the main reason they're backing up is for the event of a disaster. Really, this is kind of the main topic here when it comes to backup solutions, is understanding what your disaster recovery plan is, what your business continuity plan is, how you can build your backups around that. So Anthony mentioned earlier recovery point objective and recovery time objective considerations in your data. This is huge for understanding what you need to back up, when you need to back up, and how you should be backing that up. There's potentially considerations around like where you store your backups. I know that most cloud providers, you have a kind of a source region that you're working from. Potentially you may need to have a secondary region or another cloud provider where you're sending backups for the event that that cloud provider may be down for an extended period of time. We already kind of touched on robust observability, but this actually comes into play quite a bit with detecting when a disaster occurs. Understanding and getting alerting from your services and your systems when something may have occurred that you aren't expecting. And around that, as a SRE, I've been in my share of, incidents and DRs and everything else. And, developing playbooks for recovery scenarios is one of the main considerations I would suggest everybody to think about. When you get woken up at 2 a.m., your brain is not going to be at 100% right away. You don't want to be trying to make decisions on the fly in that scenario. So if you have playbooks for how to recover your systems in the event of a disaster already written, that's only going to help out your employees. Perform regular exercises to test those playbooks. This is something that I always suggest. Use a scenario that maybe is related to an incident that has occurred or an incident that you wanted to plan for, and let people kind of work through those playbooks on their own without you being the expert guiding them. And then postmortems. This is really the most important part of the recovery for me, is learning from it. Make sure that you have a blameless culture, inviting people who are involved in it to a postmortem, using the 5 whys or other methods to try to glean more data about what happened with the incident, and then reviewing your playbooks to understand if they were adequate for the incident that occurred that day, and either fixing them or adding to them as you go. I probably talked quite a bit there, Anthony. What are your thoughts here
No,
about disaster
you're on a
recovery?
roll. I agree with everything. I would say, having been in a few events throughout my career, making sure that everybody understands their role, right? Disaster recovery isn't a IT or security team problem. Disaster recovery is a business problem. And some people might say, well, that's why you have business continuity planning. Yes, that's true, but when you're talking about what's the maximum tolerable downtime for our business, that's a leadership question, right? That you have to understand, because there's contractual considerations there. There's client-facing considerations, right? There could be legal or regulatory reporting type of considerations that you have to take into effect. So I would say, in addition to everything that Kevin said, understand that disaster recovery business continuity is a all-encompassing, people need to be involved. have those people in your exercises, even if they don't want to be. I mean, Kevin, you and I have worked together and we've pulled teams together, and people don't understand that they have a role, whether they think they do or they don't. They're most of the tabletop exercises that I've conducted over my career have been very insightful for the team. And I've had, executives come to me and say, hey, I never realized I had to have a role, or I didn't realize I had to have a ready to go statement should something happen, right? And it brings a sense of great awareness. So I think, absolutely. I'm also a huge proponent of, the playbooks. I think that that's really great. You don't want to test out a DR strategy in the event of a disaster. You want to have that well thought out. And I couldn't agree with you more, Kevin, on the postmortems. I mean, I don't think anybody likes to hear about their mistakes, but if you bring it in a blame-free type of environment, that after-action report is invaluable data because it's, what did we do right, but what could we do better? And you learn from it, and you can put corrections in place, and you can just make your whole team or company more effective by doing it.
Yeah, great. Next up, I hinted that we're going to talk about a tool that we use here at Access Point Consulting. That tool is Druva. So we'll give you a quick overview of what Druva is first. So Druva offers a number of cloud backup solutions, including restoration and governance data, as well as they provide various solutions across all major cloud providers, Microsoft, Google, AWS, and some on-prem to cloud solutions as well. They're a software as a service first data protection company. One of the things I really liked about the tool is how easy to use the UI is for everybody. I know when Anthony and I were working with them to set up our solution, we it took us about 30 minutes to get our backup solution in place, and it was mostly me driving while somebody talked me through it. And that's something that in the IT and backup space is pretty rare. Generally, UIs are created by people who are more engineers than designers, and it was nice to see a great UI. They offer a number of different backup solutions, including end user protection, cloud DR, and threat hunting is one of the ones that Anthony mentioned earlier. So being able to search for indicators of compromise on the data that you have backed up and things like that. And then Anthony, I know you were involved heavily in the decision to choose Drupal. What were some of the considerations you had as far as picking that?
Yeah, so what I love about Druva is again being in the Microsoft world. We wanted something outside of that ecosystem so that if we had a catastrophic disaster, or if Microsoft as a provider had some type of long-lasting issue, it gave us the flexibility to be in a different cloud platform altogether. Druva, as you know, Kevin, gives customers a wide range of ability to set up in different regions within the AWS ecosystem. So it really offers a lot of granularity in terms of capability, in terms of where you want your data to be, regionally as well. I think, the blend of security features that it has around, the not only the threat hunting, the ransomware detection, strong encryption and data at rest protocols. It really gives us a lot of flexibility. And as somebody who has been in the industry for longer than I care to admit, I remember the days of LTO tape drives and trying to worry about, well, how much can I fit on here with, hardware compression and encrypting my backups, and then backup windows, and trying to figure out, how many licenses do I need for Exchange versus SQL versus Windows or whatever I'm backing up. And the great thing with a platform like Druva is that it just takes that all away. You don't have to worry about the licensing. It's more of a consumption-based model, as most cloud platforms have, cloud backup platforms have adopted. But these are key things that, as a CIO, we have a responsibility to back up our data and to make it highly available to meet our SLAs that we serve to our clients. So, really, I think when people see it in action, it's pretty impressive, and that was a lot of the reasons why we decided to, that Druva was the right solution for us.
Yeah, to talk a little bit about how we're using Druva at Access Point Consulting. Many people don't think about end user backups when they're talking about their backup considerations. It tends to be more of your system backups and your maybe your service backups, things like that. But one of the big areas that if your company were to go down and lose information would be your user data. I mean, so much data is stored either in like SharePoint or Google Cloud or other places that you don't think about backing up because those providers typically you assume back up all your stuff, and that's just not always the case. Sure, they're providing some backups behind the scenes, but in the event of a disaster, you really need to make sure that your data is in a safe space. So we chose Drupa for our end user backup protection. We use it with Microsoft 365 to back up all of our users, back up all of our intra groups, things like that associated with our Azure platform. It helps us back up our email calendars, files, and messaging data, which is something that's invaluable in the event that you lost all of your email. How would you how would your company
Yeah.
recover quickly? Allows for very easily configured retention rules. I was just looking at it today, configuration easily by day, week, month, yearly, how many
Hmm.
backups you need to keep, all those individuals, something that's really helpful and helps you keep your costs down. And then, Anthony, I know this is one that we talked about earlier. Would you like to talk a little bit about some of the e-discovery features of Druva and why that was important to us?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, e-discovery is a huge thing, and obviously, traditional ways of doing e-discovery can be costly, can be time consuming for a lot of people. Having, Druva be able to equip that in terms of just a service offering as part of their backups really takes a lot of that stress off, especially for, SMB clients or our smaller clients, even to mid-sized clients that just don't have the staff or they're operating on a lean staff already that don't have the cycles. And I will tell you, I really appreciate how quickly it was to that we had, we went from zero to full coverage basically within, our Microsoft tenant and our Azure workload tenants as well. So, I think again, it's an important consideration. It's an important topic to talk about. I stress the shared responsibility model because if there's one takeaway, it's look at what your provider is responsible for from backing up, look at what they're not responsible for and what you are responsible to do, and just assure that you have the right protection level for your business because we have so many people we know who have been affected by that in a negative way, and the time to find out is not when you have an incident. So if anything from all of these slides, I would say make sure that you're covered in the areas that you need to be for your business and to protect your data appropriately.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway of this is that just kind of checked all the boxes that we've talked about in this webinar. We were able to automate backups. We were able to add quick UI integrations. We were able to create alerting based on our backup needs. So, anomaly detection. We're able to search our data for indicators of compromise, and some of these things are just they're really nice to have, and they're not something you necessarily expect with all solutions. But having one comprehensive platform for all of this makes it really simple for our business to manage this data.
Absolutely.
All right. Just to recap this webinar a little bit, we talked a little bit about some cloud backup best practices or just backup best practices in general, how to classify your data, the importance of backup strategy considerations on cost and just regulatory needs, the importance of backup security. Obviously, the security of your data should be one of the most important aspects of your business. And then how to create a comprehensive observability plan for your data itself. So if you enjoyed this webinar and would like to look out for more webinars on these topics and more, please take a look at what we have coming up or have already created. And thank you all for your time. If you'd like to get in touch with Anthony or I, our emails are in this slide. Or if you'd like to talk to Access Point Consulting more about the products they provide or discuss Druva, please go to our website at accesspointconsulting.com. Thank you.